Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we are working our way slowly through the various uh, people, right? The categories of leadership, etc., uh, that are responsible if they sin unintentionally, and they're aware that they have sinned. In other words, contravened the divine will. I think if we try to define what we mean by sinning, it's not just uh, you know, committing a wrong, misdemeanor or something like that. It has to do with the fact that you're doing this in the face of your creator. And of course, we're talking about sins that are unintentional. In other words, people make mistakes, people err in their judgments, etc., not meaning to do so, well-meaning, etc., but nevertheless didn't prepare sufficiently or whatever. Talking about myself at times, right? And so, nevertheless, it's still an infraction. But the Torah gives these people an opportunity to cleanse themselves of this particular sin. So we start off with the high priest because his role is that of the one who actually does, he and his sons actually perform those sin offerings, right? So what happens if the high priest himself sins? So there are a whole bunch of things he has to do. He has to bring a bull and sprinkle the blood in a particular way, etc. The next category is the Sanhedrin, the high court of the land, the court that makes the final arbitration regarding how to interpret Torah, etc. If they make a mistake, so for example, if for some reason they say something is permissible on Pesach that is not permissible on Pesach, that it's actually chametz, and Rashi's very helpful in helping us with the tradition and says we are talking specifically about negative commandments. In other words, they're telling you that it's permissible, something's permissible that isn't permissible. And not only that, but that the punishment associated with that particular infraction, that particular sin, is karet. And certainly not every negative commandment has that particular punishment involved or consequence involved, right? So they also have to bring a bull because their position, what's happening is a lot of people are winding up, doing things that they shouldn't be doing as a consequence of their decisions, the level of responsibility, right? So we're in the middle of that particular section. And so here we are. So they've brought the bull, they've sprinkled the blood against the parochet, the screen in front of the Holy of Holies. They've taken some of the blood and placed it on the horns of the altar, the golden altar, the altar of incense. They've taken the rest of the blood, they've poured it out at the base of the altar in the courtyard, the altar Mizbach HaOlah, where they brought the sacrifices. So, the kol chelbo, and all of its fat, the specific fats that came from certain parts of the innards, yarim mimenu, he shall take away, he should separate from it, lift it up, v'hiktir hamizbecha, and those fats he places on that altar, the altar of Olah, that bronze altar, he causes it to smoke, hiktir, hiktir. Here we go. Let's see what Rashi has to say. V'et kol chelbo yarim, right? He should remove all the fats. V'afal pi, and despite the fact, shelo piresh kan, he doesn't explicitly say here in this particular commandment, your teret, that is the protuberance of the liver, ushte klayot, and the two kidneys. It doesn't say that, just says the fats, right? It doesn't say these particular parts, these parts of the innards. Lemeidim heim, they are learned out. In other words, he still has to bring them. They are part of the sacrifice. Mi v'asa lapar, because at the end he's going to say, he shall perform on the bull, kasher asa, just as he did, etc. In other words, the Torah compares this to another bringing of a bull, of sacrifice of a bull, and there it mentions the protuberance of the liver and the two kidneys, etc. And because it says do just like that bull, that's why. Umipnei ma, and for what reason? Lo nit parshu bo. It was not explained here. Why isn't it specified here? Tana debe Rabbi Yishmael. So we have a Tanaitic statement in the name of Rabbi Ishmael of the school, Bay house, the school of Rabbi Ishmael. Mashal Lamelech. This can be compared, the reason why they aren't mentioned here, to Lamelech, to a king, Sheza'am al Ohavo, and he was angry at his Ohavo as someone who loved him. In other words, his faithful assistant, right? Courtier, faithful assistant. The king was angry with that. Umi et besir chono mipnei chivato, and he lessened the punishment that went to in other words, in telling him, right, the humiliation that goes along with punishment, that the king left that out. He didn't want to say those things, mipnei chibato, because of his love for this particular courtier. And so likewise here, the fact that these parts are not mentioned and in the need to make atonement can be compared to that. So what we're saying is that there's a level of delight and love that God has, and we are using language relatively metaphorically, right, or metaphorically, uh, for the Sanhedrin, because the Sanhedrin has this responsibility to bring all the people under their jurisdiction, in other words, all the Jewish people, to perform the commandments in an appropriate way and to be able to answer questions that inevitably arise from the performance of the commandments. And doing commandments, performing commandments, is such an essential part of human activity. The idea of devoting our lives, because that's what this is, devoting our lives, our actions, our thoughts, etc., to our Creator, and dedicating our lives in that particular way. And of course, the great Sanhedrin was ultimately responsible for all that went into that. And that's why God loves them in this unique kind of way. Okay. So it goes on, right? Just as Rashi says, for asala par, he shall perform on the bull, right? Here we go. Ka'asher asa laparachatat, just as he did for the bull of the sin offering. Kain yaselu, so should he do for it. So it duplicates it, right? It says, this is what he should do, so should it be done to it. V'chiper alehem hakohen, and the kohen who's actually bringing these offerings, he's the one who's presenting these offerings, right? He should atone on them, should atone for them, v'nislach lahem, and they will be forgiven. They will be forgiven. Torah's saying that. Of course, there are other issues, meaning that they have to be sincere about it, etc. But regardless, this is what cleanses them. Go ahead. V'asa lapar, and he shall perform on the bull. Zeh, Rashi says, this bull that we're talking about. Ka'asher asa lapar hachatat. Just, and of course he's quoting here, right? As he performed, the priest, as he performed on the bull of the sin offering. Kamo shepiresh. So Rashi says, this is as kamo shemaforash, as is specified by Par Kohen Mashiach, where he's talking about the first example where the bull is being, and the bull of the sin offering, because there are bulls brought for sin offerings. Okay, well, not for everybody, but certainly for the Kohen. Certainly here we see for the Sanhedrin, and it should be just as he did for the bull of the Kohen Mashiach, the anointed priest, meaning the high priest. Lahavi oteret, and that is to include the lobe of the liver, ushte haklayot, and the two kidneys, shipiresham, where he expressed it there, he mentions it there. Ma shelo pireshkan, just as in the fact that he did not specify them here. Ulichfol b'mitzvot ha'avodot, and to duplicate the commandments regarding the service, right, this temple service, the lamed, to teach, she'im chasar, that if he were to omit achat mikol hamatanot, any one of the acts of putting it up on the altar, the matana. So whether it's sprinkling the blood in front of the screen, or placing it on the gold altar, or placing the parts up on the altar, any of those elements, pasul. It's not going to count. Any one part basically makes the whole of it no longer valid. It invalidates everything. The fee. Why? Shematzinu benitnin al hamizbeach. Because we find that I think this is it. I'm looking to see Yamatzinu, because we find that the application of the blood on the altar, Hachitzon, the external altar, the bronze altar where they brought the animal offerings, shenitnan b'matana achat, right? That if he, in some cases, where if he just gave one, this one sprinkling of the blood, one application of the blood, kippur, right? So, because we know that there are cases where he did not have to do more than one application of blood, and in which case it did, in fact, atone, right? Utzrach, for that reason, he has to mention here, lomar, kan, here, shematana achat mehen ma'akevet, that only one application is going to invalidate everything. That is, the akev means it invalidates the mitzvah. It is necessary for everything. Okay, right. Let's take a look here. Go to here. Okay. V'hotzi et hapar el michutz lamachane. So the remains of the animal, the bull, he should take outside the camp. V'saraf oto, he should burn it. Kasher saraf, just as he burnt et hapar harishon, the first bull. The first bull, of course, is the one mentioned regarding the high priest. And there it mentions he has to take those parts, take it outside the camp to a pure place, a place that is not impure. A place that would be not impure would, for example, be a cemetery, right? But there was a place there where they used to take and heap the ashes, what was left up on the altar. After the animals were sacrificed, etc., the ashes were placed here outside the camp in this place that was pure. That's where he has to burn the remnants of the bull. Chatat hakahal. In this case, it is considered a sin offering of the entire community. We have finished with the second category. So here we go. Asher Nasi Yechata. Interesting. This word asher here, Rashi is going to have to explain it to us. It's very strange. Asher is usually a relative pronoun meaning which or that, or stuff like that, right? The Onkelos translates it as if, im, asher. Asher being translated or understood as if is let's say it's unusual. It's unusual. But that's how he's trying to make sense of the grammar here. Rashi's going to give us a lovely, lovely interpretation of why, right? So we'll go with Onkelos for now, right? If Nasi, meaning the, so to speak, secular head of the community. In other words, we're talking, literally, Nasi is usually translated as prince. Here we could be talking about the king, right? Interesting. I think it doesn't use the word king. I never thought about this until sharing this with you, in that it doesn't say melech. That's the word for king. Because you know that in general, the idea of the Jewish people requiring a human king is an ambiguous, right? It's sort of ambivalent. We really feel that our only king is God. And I think that's the reason why here it doesn't say melech. It recognizes the fact, the Torah recognizes the fact that it does require, the community requires some kind of secular head, right? But the degree of a king and the kind of power that a king has, Torah is not too crazy about that, because we know that kings can think, we know that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so that's the subtlety of the language here. So if a Nasi, I'll keep it as a Nasi, right? If a Nasi yecheta, if he errs, right? He commits a sin, va'asa, and again, and performs or does achat mikol mitzvot Hashem, any one of the commandments, of all the commandments of God, Elohav, his king. I think that's interesting. I'm not sure that this Elohav is there in other cases. I'll have to go back and check. But we know that the word Elohim denotes the idea of commander. That is the acceptance of God as being the one to command you as to what to do. So any one of these commandments of the Lord, his God, asher lo te'asena, which should not be performed, should not be done, bishgaga, quite explicitly, unintentionally, bishgaga, va'ashem, and is in fact guilty. Okay, let's take a look here.
So, Rabbi,
Yes.
we're Jews are a nation of priests, but and not a nation of a king, right?
When it says a nation of priests, that's a very interesting interpretation that I sense you're giving. In other words, when you're saying a nation of priests, you're saying as opposed to a nation of kings, meaning that the priest is the one who leads them. Is that what, do you want to go a little further into what you're saying?
Nation of priests. Every Jew is like a priest.
Yes,
but you
that's how
said,
I understand it. Yes.
yeah, but you just said that they also do not like a king, which means they are not a nation of a king.
But that's in a different sense now, right? Okay. So we're saying having a king who is a king over them. Although, of course, we do ultimately have King David. And in the book of Samuel, we start to look at the
But
ambiguity or the ambivalency about that. We also,
he was also a
go ahead.
priest.
I'm saying
priest.
David
He was a prophet.
He was not a priest.
No, he was a prophet.
Good question. No, I don't know that we see him as a prophet necessarily. I think we do see him as a righteous king, a truly righteous king. And
I
that's,
mean, I think
I don't recollect ever seeing David being included as a prophet, as a Navi. The word
what?
Navi itself means a spokesman, right? David does not quote God. David prays to God. David is the author of the book of Psalms, right? The human response, the appropriate human response to one's creator. But he's not a prophet. He doesn't come and say, "Thus saith the Lord."
Oh, I thought he was one of the first prophets.
No, David is not. No, he is not. He's
I
not.
gotta read that.
Okay. Right. Well, if you did see it somewhere, you'll let me know. Okay.
No,
Right.
there was involving King Saul. Like he was the one that was telling Saul, okay, you'll be king, but now you won't be, or I'll be king now, or something.
No, no, no. He was very respectful of Saul. If you read the book of Samuel, you'll see that it was the prophet Samuel. Samuel absolutely was a prophet who
Oh no, yeah,
who had to go and find David after God rejected Saul as king.
right, exactly. Okay, prophet Samuel. Okay,
Yes.
I have to reread David. I thought he was a prophet.
No, no, it's okay. I'm glad you mentioned it, right? It's great that you did. Yes, Judith.
Well, how was David a truly righteous king, given what he did with Bathsheba?
Lovely, lovely, lovely question. Right. You'll see. Let me do the Rashi, Judith, and if your question
Sure.
is not answered, you bring it up again, and I will absolutely do my best to deal with it. Okay? This
Yep.
word asher, right? Look at this. The Rashi. Asher nasiyata. He says lashon ashrei. He says this asher has the connotation of happy, well-founded. I believe Samson Raphael Hirsch of blessed memory says forward thinking, right? Thinking ahead, thinking about where's life taking you, right? Ashrei, and now he goes ahead, Rashi, Ashrei, happy, right? Let's say, or fortunate, forward thinking. Hador, that generation, Shehanasi shelo, whose leader, we'll say, whose Nasi, noten lev, pays attention, lahavi kapara, to bring an atonement al shigagato, for his shgaga, right? For his unintentional sin. Kal vachomer, and from if he feels a need to bring an atonement offering for his unintentional sin, kal vachomer, how much the more so, shemit charet al zdunotov, that he regrets his intentional sins. If he's worried about his unintentional sins, all the more about his intentional sins. And we know that when you're in very powerful positions, the likelihood of your doing something that is inappropriate, of committing sins, is huge. So the issue isn't so much he was perfect, never made a sin, never did something wrong. That's not the issue. The issue is, does he regret it? Does he regret it? And does he take steps to make atonement, right? To repent for what he did? That's the question. And David is a wonderful example because, yes, he essentially, I would say, let's say even technically, committed murder. He also committed adultery, two major sins, but he pays for them and he regrets them. And for the most part, he was a righteous person. He judged his people righteously, etc. So the example is for all of us, that the issue isn't whether or not we're perfect. Our righteousness has less to do with being perfect than recognizing when we've done something wrong, admitting it, and repenting for it. This is a great Rashi. This is a memorable Rashi. And that's all he has to say there about that asher, right? Judith, are you comfortable with my response? I'm assuming you may be having issues with the mute button or whatever. Well, just raise your hand at some point and I'll be happy to recognize you.
Yes.
Yeah,
Sorry. Yes, it was a problem.
Okay.
Um,
I know.
No, that does answer it. Thank you very much.
I think it's so important, Judith. I think it's a terrible thing when people feel that that they're beyond the pale, and so they give up. So, believe it or not, I'm going to have to stop here. I'm going to stop the share, and thank you for joining me this morning. And I'm going to have to stop at this point. So I'm going to stop the recording